To Facebook, it's The Bright Side with Carol, Lavinia and Shazad. Very happy to have in the studio with us Dr. Aaron Ng in very national colours. Hello, Dr. Aaron.
Well, it's my institution's colour.
Oh, Singapore Institute of Technology,
Yeah.
SIT. Thank you so much for making time for us today. We're very curious about this topic, actually, quiet hiring. And who is it affecting and is it a rising trend? So many questions. And of course, if you do have any questions, please comment on Facebook. It could lead you to a cool prize this morning.
That's right.
Yeah, tufting. We'll tell you more about it in just a little while. In the meantime, we're heading back on air. Chesney Hawks and the one and only here on 1FM 91.3. Good morning. You're waking up on the bright side. Carol, Lavinia and Shazad with you. And this morning, so happy to welcome to the 1FM studio, Dr. Aaron Ng. Hello. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning.
And Dr. Aaron is an expert on societal norms and policy matters at the Singapore Institute of Technology.
So, Dr. Aaron, we're hearing this term more and more, quiet hiring. Why don't you set the context? What exactly is that all about?
Well, to define quiet hiring, we can kind of understand it as a company filling an existing position or a vacancy, but not adding to the headcount. So they don't physically hire one more person, but they fill that position through other means, typically through looking at their current employees to see who might be a fit for that position.
Does this involve an increase in pay as well?
Well, it should, I think. But I think when we talk about quiet hiring, really it's more about first getting people who might, within the company, who might have those skills or competencies, but they are currently performing another role to consider stepping up. It's not something that can be forced upon people, because typically when you are hired for a particular role, a particular job. So quiet hiring is about looking at the person and asking, hey, do you have any other competencies that either we don't know of, or maybe you've been with us for some time? Might you have used your skills future? Might you have done something to gain other kind of competencies, and now you're capable of doing something else that we have a vacancy for, but that position hasn't been filled?
Okay, so question. This doesn't mean I'm performing two different job functions at the same time, right? It means I'm relinquishing my previous job position, my job role, and taking on another.
Well, it can take several forms. I think at the beginning, unless you're able to kind of demonstrate that you really can take that position full time, then obviously the company can consider changing your job, right, to that. But if not, then what could potentially happen at the beginning is that you may be asked for a short period of time to perform that job role. It may be a little bit on top of your current job roles and what you have to do, but it's usually for a short time to assess whether you are able to do it well. And after that, the management can decide, okay, so what should we do? Is this vacancy more important than the vacancy that you're currently hired for? If it is, and we feel that you have the competency to do it well, then we could potentially then move you to that role.
Dr. Aaron, it's really interesting what you shared with us here and why it's so important for us to be aware of quiet hiring. Can you share with us, are there job sectors in particular that are most affected by quiet hiring?
Well, I think quiet hiring tends to happen in two major circumstances. One is when there is an acute shortage of talent for certain job functions, which I think in the last few years we might have seen, like analytics, big data, and that was the rage, and there are not enough of these data scientist people. So, and companies who want to leverage on big data to make decisions, then that was kind of hard to hire. So it might people might actually try to look within the current workforce to see if someone knows something and then do some quiet hiring. The other more common situation is when really the economy is not doing very well. The company has a limited budget to hire an additional headcount. Then they might look into their current pool of employees to see if anyone has those skills and competencies to kind of like cover the company for a short term. And like I said earlier, if you do well and they think that that position is really important, then they might then transit the person to that role permanently.
Thank you so much for bringing some clarity around the definition of quiet hiring before we all get up in arms and why is my boss giving me extra stuff to do? The chat continues on Facebook Live, facebook.com/1FM91.3. There's a chance for you to win a cool prize for commenting or asking a question.
That's right. Come and chime on in the conversation, and it could win you a 2.5-hour tufting session from We Tuft, Singapore's biggest tufting studio. It is worth $128.
All right, more of Dr. Aaron in just a bit. Good morning, everyone.
Hey,
Welcome
everyone.
to Facebook. All right, we're chatting with
Hello.
Dr. Aaron. Fire away.
Dr. Aaron Ng, of course, he's an expert on societal norms and policy matters at the Singapore Institute of Technology. We're talking about quiet hiring here, you've kind of defined what it's about. Basically, and if I may put it in a nutshell, you're already in a job and you're asked by the company, hey, could you kind of do this other gig that we're doing? And then for a while at least, you're a parallel part, and maybe at some point they'll decide whether to bring you across.
Yep.
Somehow, if my boss asked me like Shazad did, I might actually do it. Hey, do you think you could? So nice of you to ask that way.
But there are instances where it may not be put as quite as diplomatic as that, right? It might come across as you need to do this other job, especially in these tougher times.
Or is it something that's been going on for ages? It's just that now we have new terminology for it, quiet hiring.
I don't think it's an entirely new phenomenon. I think, it's just that now researchers kind of like put a nice term
Yeah, they came
to
up with
it,
a new
like,
phrase for it, but actually
yeah.
it's been going on for ages, right?
Yeah. I think for me, the way I look at it, quiet hiring is really more relational in nature. It's not really transactional because the transactional part is when you hire someone to perform a job role. It's stated in the contract, right? Okay, so these are your main duties. But quiet hiring, whatever you're asked to do isn't in that original contract, right? So
Right.
if you want to perform above and beyond something that you are mainly hired for, then what would tip the employees, decision, right, towards being favorable to perform additional tasks? And so that really is the kind of relationship the person has
That's a good
with
point.
the manager, with the
Very good
management.
point.
Yeah.
Very, very good point. So would it help if like you come up with this price list and you print out all these additional tasks and you go like, boss, I'm on it. That will be an additional $100.
Well, I wouldn't.
Bring it back to being transactional.
I wouldn't say that you
You're
should
fired.
have that list because I do think that that's not really good for relations. But what is important, underlying that in my view is that if you agree to kind of step up, then you must manage expectations because at the end of the day, you also have the same number of working hours, right? So if you're going to devote some of your time to step up and fill that other role and vacancy, that takes away time from your original role and vacancy. So you need to tell the bosses that, hey, you've got to be realistic. I'm not Superman. I'm not Superwoman. The task that I was originally hired to do, you need to have lower expectations, right? Well, because I've taken my time and my energies to try to fulfill that other role that you have asked.
But it's kind of tough to navigate that sometimes, though. You do want to help your boss out, but at the same time, you know that you have quite a lot on your plate. So how do what is the right way to approach it rather than, it's not like we're saying a flat out no, but maybe just not yet or give me time or something like that. How do you navigate that without affecting the relationship, as you say, with your managers?
Well, I think the way we communicate is really important. I think you really want to frame it as, I want to be a team player. I want to be someone who can contribute effectively, but at the same time I also need some understanding and resources to help me perform effectively, because if I'm trying to kind of like burn the candle on two ends, that's not healthy for myself. That's also not healthy for the company.
And should these additional duties be something reflected in, say, your KPI?
Yes, definitely. I think before agreeing, most employees, should ask the bosses, the managers, okay, if I step up, right, would this kind of like be looked upon favorably during appraisal time? Because
Yeah.
If it's not, then I guess there's really not much of an incentive for me to want to do it. So I think there has to be understanding both
Yeah.
ways.
So no wonder you pointed out earlier it's about managing expectations, not just yours, but also your bosses, if you were to take up these additional duties. I think
Yes.
that's a really good point to bring across.
When you're on the receiving end of it, right, you're doing a cost benefit analysis in your head. Is this going to be worth my time? How am I going to do my other job? Is this going to reflect badly on me? Is this going to reflect well on me if I choose it? You might also think this quiet hiring is a nice euphemism for basically piling on more work on me. So am I being targeted for that because the boss doesn't like me, or am I being asked to do it because he thinks or she thinks that I'm capable? I mean, a lot must be going on in an employee's head when this happens. How do you get through that minefield?
Well, I guess at the end of the day, you really have to ask yourself and take a look at it, perhaps not just from a short-term perspective, but a longer-term perspective, right? So let's say that you're asked to perform another role. And and you already tell yourself, I'm kind of like done with whatever I'm hired for. I've accomplished whatever I want to accomplish. I would like a new challenge. But if I were to go out and apply for that position, I may not be able to convince, right, the HR over there that I have the requisite experience for it. So maybe my current organization has a similar role. I could kind of step up a little bit, clock some experience, clock some mileage, and then later on, if let's say I'm not happy with working here in this role anymore, I can easily transit elsewhere and I can say that, hey, I have some experience.
Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to get you to repeat that question,
Sure.
Shazad, because I think truly valid. The Eurythmics and Sisters are doing it for themselves here on 1FM 91.3 Good Times, Greatest Hits. Good morning and welcome to The Bright Side. You're with Carol Lavinia and Shazad. And in the studio with us this morning is Dr. Aaron Ng, answering some very salient and important questions about quiet hiring. This is a trend that we're seeing more and more of these days. And in fact, off air, we're talking about how maybe it's been going on for a long time now. It's just that we now have a new fancy term for it, quiet hiring. So Shazad, you had an amazing question off air.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a fancy term, and I was wondering, it could be euphemism for just giving me more work. If you're on the receiving end of it, if you're being asked these questions, and an employee would be doing sort of a cost-benefit analysis on how I should be receiving this news. Is this a reflection of me with the bosses? Is it a good thing because it gives me an opportunity to show them what I can do, or is it they're piling something because they don't like what I do? It's a bit of a minefield, but there must be a way of navigating through this.
Yeah, so my position is that when employees do the so-called cost-benefit analysis, it shouldn't just be short-term, but they should also take a longer-term perspective. So when you think about it, like hey, maybe you feel that you've done whatever you can, right, with your current position, and that maybe you're looking for new challenges. But if you were to go out and try to get yourself a job for a particular position, then maybe because you haven't been done it before, you don't have much experience, people are not willing to take the risk, right? But if you currently have a similar position that's available, and you're in your company, and you're like, hey, maybe I don't mind, right, stepping up and trying that role because I think I have some ability to do that fairly well. You could do that, and then after clocking some time on that role, and you feel like, hey, maybe I want to do this role permanently. Maybe I'm not happy with this organization. Then when you go to somewhere else, they might be more confident to give you because you have something to show.
I think that's really great. You're kind of pointing out that quiet hiring doesn't all have to be this sort of like dirty thing. It can actually be an opportunity, as long as the employee, like you said, manages the expectations and also tries to see if there's any like really positive outcomes that can come from gaining experience. And who knows, you might find something else, a role that you do prefer or you might excel in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, if you look at the Singapore current kind of like employment landscape, the government is always talking about upskilling, reskilling, take micro classes, gain micro credentials and things like that. I think a lot of people, when they start doing these kind of things, they will gain new skills, new competencies that they were not originally trained for. So they could then put this into practice within their current organization, gain some skills, maybe do a project or two, have something to show, and then you can kind of like put it in your CV, right? So you kind of like further bulletproof your prospects on the job market in case you need to move or in case you get retrenched. And hey, I have more options.
Yeah, that's a positive way of looking at things. But what are some of the downsides to it, though?
I think the downsides really is when the employee is not managed well. When basically, I give you one salary, I would like you to do as many jobs as possible, without regard for the employee's welfare, the mental well-being. So that, I think, is the chief danger. And this is something that bosses will also have to be a little bit more enlightened, because if you burn an employee out,
Right.
and the person just decides to drop you like, I quit, right? And then replacing an employee is not like something that you snap your fingers and you can plug and play someone immediately. So you really need to kind of manage between trying to kind of like squeeze all the juice out of the poor sugarcane employee.
Sugarcane employee, I like that.
Would the converse side of quiet hiring be quiet quitting, where say you are piled on this stuff, but then you're thinking, well, I'm just going to do the bare minimum?
Yeah, I mean, quiet hiring, I think, when the term came about, because everybody was talking about quiet quitting, and then some people looked at this phenomenon that's been going on, and it's like, hey, that's kind of seems to be the polar opposite, right? Because the quiet quitting phenomenon simply means that I'm on the job, but I'm just doing the bare minimum. But for quiet hiring, you need to go above and beyond what you were originally tasked to do, so you need to step up. So that's kind of like the opposite of quiet quitting.
Okay, we want to understand the trends of quiet hiring here in Singapore, whether or not this is on the rise. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions for Dr. Aaron, do drop them via WhatsApp 88550913. Anything to do with quiet hiring or quiet firing even. And we're also on Facebook at facebook.com/1FM91.3. Drop us a comment there as well. More of Dr. Aaron in just a bit. Ooh, Levy?
Yes, so we just got off air talking about the possible cons of quiet hiring. So now we want to focus on really the trends that happen because of quiet hiring. What would you say, and can you comment on how the retrenchment cycle plays into all this quiet hiring?
Well, for retrenchment, I think the thing is that why is it that people get retrenched, right? It's usually typically because the company does have done the sums, right? And they're like, okay, we can't support, right, this number of employees anymore, so we have to let people go. But typically, when that happens, that doesn't mean that work gets reduced. So work still has to go on. So when retrenchment happens, then if the people that who are let go, right, those positions are still open and still needs to be filled. It has to be filled from somewhere, right? We can't add a headcount because we just let people go. So you then have to look into your existing pool and ask yourself, who could potentially fill those positions? How do we kind of manage, right, to try to mitigate and cover those areas with a smaller pool of people?
So, this goes to show, retrenchment is always a concern. It has been for years, for decades. So, quiet hiring has happened, just that now it's got a fancy name.
Yes, definitely. And I guess everyone, if you're working, you don't want to be retrenched, right? But I think if you step up, right, that actually kind of helps you to kind of bulletproof yourself from being retrenched, because you obviously can cover a few more areas. So if I am a boss and I'm trying to decide between two people, I'm going to ask myself, so who do I want to let go? So I think all else being equal, the multi-tool, the guy with a few more abilities in his toolbox versus the guy who can only do the one-trick pony, then I think maybe I'll just have to unfortunately let the one-trick pony go.
I want to ask you about morale Okay, so say you're the one who takes on the role. Sometimes others might say, "Well, that guy's spoiling the market," because then now next time we get asked, we're going to have to do that, or makes us, or the other hand, the other flip side to that is, if everyone is having to do extra work now, the company says, "Okay, I want 4 or 5 of you in the department to do extra roles." Does everyone then feel under the cosh and feel like, "Oh my God, it's where's this company going if we're all being asked to do extra roles?"
And if the person doing that role in the first place is not really doing the role, it's falling to other people.
I mean, there are different ways you can cut this, right? So morale must play a part in all this as well.
Yes.
Well, I think it goes back to what I've said earlier about, it's really quiet hiring is all about relationships, right? So I think if the managers, the leaders actually create a positive workplace culture,
right,
that really goes a long way. And of course, I think for individual employees, it is very important to manage expectations. Like, you're willing to step up, but of course you have to make it clear that, okay, these are kind of the boundaries, and your colleagues can see that, hey, you're stepping up, but you're not like letting yourself be kind of like walked all over by management and all these
But
kind of things.
having said that, some people get chastised for establishing boundaries.
Well, I guess it's an art, right? It's not like, I guess the issue is less of that it is not so good to establish boundaries, and more of how the boundaries are established. So this is where I think people really need to kind of like brush up on their communication skills. How do we talk to people in a way that makes them feel comfortable when establishing boundaries?
Like your negotiation skills,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And to do it with grace, with respect,
Yes.
so that all parties involved. That's a really, really
That's
good
a good point, yeah.
I also like how, Dr. Aaron, you mentioned a few times about bulletproofing yourself, your CV, your job, your role. I think that's a really key takeaway for me as well.
Okay, very interesting stuff. Do we know whether this trend of what is the firing trend in Singapore currently?
Yep.
Well, I think currently the labor market is generally quite tight for many sectors, so it's not that easy to hire people. So, but I think this is really, again, this kind of varies perhaps from industry to industry and from firm to firm. Typically, I think for SMEs, quiet hiring might not really be something that feature on their radar because already you're short-staffed. People are wearing multiple hats. So, quiet hiring seems to be more of a feature for larger companies or even NMCs where, the job roles tend to be a bit more highly specialized. Whereas if you're in a SME or you're in a startup, people are already wearing multiple hats. So that is less of a feature.
Okay.
But at some point, these companies have to realize maybe we can't just do quiet hiring. Maybe we just have to hire more employees, right?
Yes, correct.
There's that line where there's maybe too much of an overload of
Correct.
this quiet hiring, right?
Yes, so I guess the quiet hiring can be a stopgap measure,
Right.
To kind of cover positions that you really have an urgent need for. But I think organizations and companies should also make longer term plans. Like if we really need this position for the longer term, what do we do? Do we want to up profile our people? Or do we want to hire a new person? What are the pros and cons of each approach? And then you handle accordingly.
Okay, well, Dr. Aaron, we're going to come back live on air as well to wrap up our session. Maybe you can think about 3 things that people, employers, can have in mind as we approach this, and 3 things that maybe the employee as well can bear in mind when it comes to handling quiet hiring in their companies, because it's not something that is going to go away anytime soon, right?
Yeah.
And you
Right.
just never know when it's going to fall on your lap as well. So maybe 3 things for employees and employers to keep in mind as we navigate this pretty tricky situation, I would feel. I mean, depending on the company environment and culture as well.
Yeah.
It's not something that we're just seeing in like maybe local companies, right? But global, like big companies, global ones as well.
Yeah.
So you find them more in bigger companies, as you're saying.
Yeah, I think the best the textbook example is always Google, right? So Google's
yeah.
policy is, if we can hire from people inside Google, that's our number one choice to fill any position in any part of the company, because they think that, if you make it into Google, obviously you have certain attributes and you've already fit into our culture. So it's much faster to move people.
Yeah, just take
along.
one of your own. In fact, we see it happening here as well. I've known a number of colleagues who've actually gone and joined different divisions because, change of interest, or they want to, expand their portfolio as well. Yeah, so it's actually, it isn't always necessarily a bad thing as opposed to what some people think it might be. So that's actually been quite insightful for us. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we want to bulletproof ourselves, you guys. Do we have any questions on Facebook? I want to say good morning to One Alun. He says, I like to do things outside of my job scope better if it comes with money.
Fair enough.
Of
Fair
course.
enough.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's a
better
given,
because
right?
of money.
Surely.
Yeah, and Henry also wants to know, will there be an increase in pay? In fact, a lot of people, is that extra pay for doing all these extra things?
Well, I guess, again, it's really about communicating, managing expectations. I mean, you could perhaps say that I'm willing to do it for a short while, without asking for anything much. But if the bosses really like it, then you have to kind of then ask the boss, so what's the long-term plan? Do you want me to take this on more permanently? If so, then, how do we then discuss the contracts, right? The terms of employment and things like that. So I think to step up, it's perhaps okay to say that, okay, manage expectations a bit. I'll do this for a while, maybe a couple of months, right? And then see how that goes before. I mean, if you are gonna start to talk terms right from the bat, okay, before I do this, what are the terms, right? I mean, that might really kind of be a little bit off-putting. So I think there's really not much loss, right? To show that you're kind of like a team player from the beginning.
I wonder some of this is also cultural, right? Because
Yes.
in Asia, while we may be thinking we want that extra money, as a lot of people are saying here, I'm not sure how easy it is to articulate that at the start. Whereas in the West, I think it's pretty upfront.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're going to ask me to do that, it's quite transactional.
Yes.
So it could be a cultural issue as well to look at.
Yes,
to
yes,
consider.
definitely.
True. All right, we're going to jump back live on air for our last talk set. 3 things for people to remember, and maybe a quick recap on the trends of quiet hiring in companies here in Singapore and maybe globally as well. Levy, could you just take us out of that?
We just heard from Sting singing about a desert rose here on the bright side. Good morning to you. It's Carol Shazad, Lavinia, and Dr. Aaron joining us here in the studio to talk about quiet hiring.
All right, so Dr. Aaron, actually we've noticed quite a trend. Is this on the rise here in Singapore, quiet hiring, and in small or in big companies?
Well, I think quiet hiring tends to be a little bit more prevalent in bigger companies, because in bigger companies, number one, you have more employees, and the job roles tend to be a little bit more well defined as compared to SMEs, where the headcounts are usually lower, fewer, and then people are already juggling multiple hats, right?
Yeah.
So in fact, they are pretty much doing quiet hiring
From the
perhaps on day
start.
one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So all around the world in big companies, you'll see this happening now.
Yes, the textbook, right? Case is Google, right? Really big company with all kinds of functions, all kinds of positions. So their preference has always been that we would rather hire internally, because they've been with us, we know them, and their peers, the colleagues can vouch for them, and
Right.
if they say that they're really good, obviously they must be good, and therefore we can then try to move the person to another position that might be a better fit, or we have really urgent need to fill. Yeah, so that's the preference.
One thing we're noticing from a lot of our listeners is talking about maybe getting the commensurate pay that comes with the extra work, or does it come with money? Will we get more? The tough part is asking for that at the start, because how's that going to reflect on you? And I think perhaps here in Asia we tend to be more reticent about it in front of our bosses, though we might be moaning about it quietly inside. And I guess in the West, it's a little bit more transactional that way, quite upfront. What are you going to pay me for that? How do you? It's not an easy one to work through, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not very easy. I think, not to stereotype, but in general, I think Asians, we tend to kind of like, our culture perhaps is a little bit more hierarchical in a way. So we have a lot of deference for the people who are on top of us. But I think really it's not a matter of, you shouldn't negotiate,
Right.
but perhaps it's a matter of how you should negotiate. And I think if you put yourself into the shoes of your bosses, right, like, you probably be like, hey, obviously it's reasonable that people should be compensated for doing extra work,
Right.
but at the same time, you will also have the concern, right? Can the person actually do the job? So
Right.
maybe something that could be a nice in between would be that, as the employee, you can say that, hey, let me just take a small piece of the work. Let me do it, and you can kind of like take a look at it to see if you're satisfied. Like, you give the boss like, okay, try it a little bit first.
It's a nice
hey,
compromise.
yeah. So then, hey, it's good, right? So then if that's the case, then perhaps can we have a discussion about my responsibilities and how we want to move forward from here? I think that would be a nice compromise.
Very
Okay.
diplomatically said.
Yes, indeed. We need you here, actually. Can you give us 3 tips, in closing, 3 tips for employers and employees when it comes to quiet hiring?
I think on the employer end, the most important thing is to recognize that your employee, every single one of them probably have the same number of working hours. So if you ask an employee to kind of do a bit more, that out of the current job scope that the employee has been employed for, then there has to be a recognition that time away to do those new things that are being asked for, the employee stepping up to, means time taken off, right? What he was originally supposed to do. So how then would the management or the employer must be able to clearly articulate how then do we assess or appraise you, to be fair to you. So I think that's the number one. And number two is to also to kind of like watch the employee to make sure that the employee doesn't burn out, because sometimes you do have really good employees.
Yeah.
They are like, wow, I really love this place, I want to do my best, then they end up maybe chewing off a bit more than
Yes.
they could, right? So I think pretty much these are the two main things. And to summarize, just try to be fair to the employee. You don't want to burn out people, because if they are burned out, that's not good to the organization. Either their effectiveness, right, at doing any role is reduced, or if it gets really bad, they may just say, okay, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to quit. And replacing a person, like I said, it's not like snap your fingers and
Yeah.
there's an immediate
Yeah,
replacement. So
absolutely.
that's not going to happen. And on the employee side, if you ask me, I think the most critical thing would be, as always, to manage expectations, right? So you may have, been with the company for 10 years, then you took up some courses, you've gained some new skills, and you think that, hey, I might want to step up. But the thing is that don't go around overselling yourself right at the beginning, right? So that would be the most dangerous move. But rather you can say, tell the bosses, okay, so I see that you're advertising for this position. I have some skills that might be able to might be somewhat of a fit for this. Perhaps I can try this for a while, and then after that, let's see how that goes, and we will take it from there. So I think from the employee must take the mindset that this is not me being exploited, right? So this actually could potentially be an opportunity for me to pivot away from something that I have been doing. Yeah.
Okay, well, Dr. Aaron, thank you so much for this very insightful chat this morning. Where can people find you to find out more about quiet hiring and firing and work trends?
Well, I'm happy to speak. I mean, my contact is available on my institution's webpage, Singapore Institute of Technology. I think if you go up and key my name, you should be able to find me. I'm happy to have a discussion.
Wow, thank you.
You sound like
Very
you would
sweet
make a
of you.
great boss, Dr. Aaron Ng. Once again, thank you so much for our chat. You can find him at the Singapore Institute of Technology. All the best, Dr. Aaron.
Thank you.
Good times. Greatest hits. 1FM 91.3. 91.3 weather.
Temperatures are going to hit a high of 31 and dip